Emma Calloway's heart stopped as she stumbled into the small clearing. There, beneath the dappled sunlight filtering through autumn leaves, lay the largest dog she'd ever seen, a German shepherd. Once magnificent, now barely clinging to life. Blood matted its dark fur, and deep gashes revealed the horror it had endured. One of its legs twisted at an impossible angle. Its ribcage rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. "Oh, my God," Emma whispered, her berry basket dropping from trembling fingers. The dog's eyes, amber and clouded with pain, flickered open at the sound. A low, rattling growl emerged from its throat, but the threat dissolved into a whimper that pierced Emma's 8-year-old heart like nothing she'd ever felt before. The dog tried to raise its massive head, then collapsed back onto the forest floor with a sound that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human, but pure suffering. Emma felt hot tears spill down her cheeks. She couldn't explain why, but in that moment, Emma knew she was this dog's only chance at survival. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Emma Calloway had always been the quiet one. At 8 years old, she was small for her age, with honey blonde hair that fell in unruly waves around a face dotted with freckles. The third-grade bullies at Maplewood Elementary called her Mouse because she spoke so softly teachers often asked her to repeat herself. Unlike the other children who raced around the playground, Emma preferred the company of books about animals and adventures in far-off places. This summer had been different. With her mother, Abigail, working double shifts at Maplewood General, trying to keep a roof over our heads, Sweetie, Emma had been sent to stay with her mother's uncle in the Appalachian foothills. Uncle Jackson Harlow was not what anyone would call a conventional babysitter. At 58, the former Army medic turned forest ranger lived alone in a cabin that stood a good 20 minutes from the nearest neighbor. His face, weathered by decades of sun and wind, bore a permanent squint, and his hands were calloused from years of hard work. "City folk think these woods are all peaceful and pretty," he'd told Emma on her first day. "But nature ain't a petting zoo. It's got teeth and claws and doesn't much care if you live or die." Despite his gruff exterior, Jackson had shown unexpected gentleness, teaching Emma to identify edible berries and medicinal plants, to follow animal tracks, and to navigate using the sun and stars. The cabin itself was a marvel to Emma. 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, walls lined with bookshelves holding field guides and military medical manuals, and a screened porch where Jackson carved wooden animals in the evenings. No television, spotty radio reception, and certainly no internet. Her mother had worried Emma would be bored to tears, but instead, she'd flourished in the quiet wilderness. What Emma didn't know about Uncle Jackson, what her mother had only hinted at, were the nightmares that still plagued him 20 years after his service, or how he sometimes woke shouting names of men long dead. She didn't understand why he jumped at unexpected noises, or why he spent hours rehabilitating injured wildlife with a tenderness that contradicted his harsh words. All Emma knew was that in Uncle Jackson's woods, she felt a freedom she'd never experienced in town, where her mother's anxious warnings kept her close to home. That morning had started like any other at Uncle Jackson's cabin. Emma had awoken to the smell of coffee and flapjacks sizzling on the cast-iron stove. Through the small window beside her bed, she'd watched the mist rising from the valley below, transforming the landscape into something from a fairy tale. "Morning? Half pint?" Uncle Jackson had greeted her, sliding a plate stacked with flapjacks drizzled in maple syrup across the worn wooden table. "Got plans for you today." Emma had ducked her head, hiding her smile at the nickname. Back home, being small was a liability. Here, it was just another fact, like the blue of the sky or the green of the pines. What kind of plans, she'd asked, cutting into her breakfast. "Thought we might make my famous blackberry cobbler," Jackson said, pouring himself more coffee from the dented percolator. "But we're fresh out of berries." He'd given her a knowing look over the rim of his mug. "Reckon you're old enough to pick some on your own, long as you stick to the rules." Emma had sat up straighter, pride blooming in her chest. In 3 weeks at the cabin, she'd never been allowed to venture into the woods alone. "Rule 1, Jackson had said, holding up a calloused finger. "You stay on the marked trail, blue blazes on the trees. Remember, you follow those and they'll lead you right to the best berry patch, about half a mile from here." "Blue blazes," Emma had repeated solemnly. "Rule 2, you take this." He'd handed her his old canteen, the green canvas covering faded from years of sun. "Water's important, even when you don't think you're thirsty." "Yes, sir." "Rule 3, you be back by noon, or I come looking. And trust me, half pint. You don't want me having to come find you." Despite the gruffness in his voice, his eyes had crinkled with that almost smile Emma had come to recognize. "Got it, got it. Rule 4, got it. You see anything at all that makes you nervous, you turn around and come straight back. No heroes in these woods." Emma had nodded, already imagining herself as the intrepid explorer from her favorite books. And so, with the woven basket Uncle Jackson used for mushroom hunting tucked under her arm and wearing her red jacket against the morning chill, Emma had set off down the trail. The forest in morning light was magical dew sparkling on spiderwebs stretched between branches, birds calling to one another from the canopy above, the occasional rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. For the first 20 minutes, Emma had dutifully followed the blue blazes, stopping occasionally to pick the early blackberries that grew alongside the path. But then she'd spotted it, a monarch butterfly with wings like stained glass, fluttering just off the trail. Without thinking, Emma had followed, watching as it danced from one shaft of sunlight to another. By the time the butterfly disappeared into the canopy, Emma realized she could no longer see the blue blazes. Turning in a slow circle, she tried to orient herself the way Uncle Jackson had taught her. The sun had risen higher, making it harder to tell east from west. The trees all looked the same, towering oaks and hickories stretching toward the sky. "Don't panic," she whispered to herself, remembering Jackson's lessons. "When lost, stay put." But then she'd seen it another clump of blackberries, bigger and juicier than any on the marked trail. Just a little farther, she'd told herself, just enough to fill the basket, and then I'll find my way back. One berry patch had led to another, and before she knew it, Emma had wandered into unfamiliar territory. The forest had grown denser, the underbrush thicker. That's when she'd stumbled into the clearing and found the dog. Now, standing before the wounded animal, Emma's adventure took on a different weight. This wasn't like finding a bird with a broken wing or a rabbit caught in brambles, the kinds of injured creatures Uncle Jackson sometimes brought home to tend. This was something else entirely. The German shepherd's once glossy coat was dull and matted with both fresh and dried blood. Deep lacerations crisscrossed its muscular body. some fresh and still weeping, others older and crusted over. Its left hind leg lay at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. But worst of all was its face, one ear nearly torn off, and a gash running from the corner of its mouth up toward its eye, giving it a grotesque, permanent snarl, fighting her instinct to run. Emma took a tentative step forward. The dog's growl deepened, its lips pulling back to reveal teeth stained with blood, whether its own or something else's. Emma couldn't tell. "It's okay," she said, using the soft voice she'd learned from Uncle Jackson when approaching injured animals. "I won't hurt you. I won't hurt." The dog's growl subsided slightly, but its amber eyes remained fixed on her, tracking her every movement. Emma noticed how, despite its aggression, the animal seemed unable to raise its head more than a few inches from the ground. She set her basket down slowly and unscrewed the cap of her canteen. The dog's eyes followed her hands, and she saw its tongue dart out to lick cracked, dry lips. "You're thirsty, aren't you?" Emma murmured. "And hungry, too, I bet." Moving with deliberate slowness, she poured some water into her cupped palm and extended it toward the dog, stopping well out of reach of those powerful jaws. The animal's nostrils flared, catching the scent of fresh water. "Come on," she encouraged. "It's just water. It'll help you feel better." For a long moment, the standoff continued. Emma, with her hand extended, the dog watching warily. Then, with what seemed like enormous effort, the shepherd dragged itself forward a few inches, whimpering with each movement. When it finally reached her hand, it lapped desperately at the water in her palm. Emma's heart soared. "Good dog," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes again. "You're a good dog." She continued offering handfuls of water until the dog seemed sated. Up close, she could see how severe its condition truly was. Beneath the matted fur, its ribs protruded sharply. Old scars layered beneath new wounds told a story of prolonged suffering. "What happened to you?" Emma asked, though she knew the dog couldn't answer. "Who did this?" As if responding to the concern in her voice, the shepherd made a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a sigh, and let its head sink back to the ground. Its eyes, though clouded with pain, held an intelligence that startled Emma. She knew she needed to get help. Uncle Jackson would know what to do, how to treat these terrible wounds. But the dog was clearly too injured to walk, and she wasn't even sure which direction would lead her back to the cabin. Emma looked at her watch, a gift from her mother before she'd left for Uncle Jackson's. It was already past 11, less than an hour before Uncle Jackson would come looking for her. But would he find her? And would he find her in time to save the dog? A sudden memory flashed in Emma's mind, a story Uncle Jackson had told about a soldier who'd used his shirt to bandage a wounded comrade. Without hesitation, Emma shrugged off her red jacket and then pulled off the flannel shirt she wore underneath, leaving only her undershirt. The autumn air prickled her skin, but she ignored it as she began tearing the flannel into strips. "This might hurt," she warned the dog as she approached with the makeshift bandages. "But I have to stop the bleeding." To her surprise, the shepherd remained still as she carefully wrapped the worst of its wounds, binding them as best she could with her limited knowledge. Only when she gently touched its broken leg did it yelp, a sound so pitiful it brought fresh tears to Emma's eyes. "I'm sorry," she soothed. "I'm so sorry." but I'm going to get you help. I promise." The reality of her situation settled heavily on Emma's small shoulders. She couldn't leave the dog here to die, but she couldn't carry a full-grown German Shepherd either. And even if she could, she wasn't sure which way to go. Looking into the dog's eyes, Emma made her decision. Somehow, she would get this dog back to Uncle Jackson's cabin. Somehow, she would save its life. "We're going to be okay," she told the shepherd, trying to convince herself as much as the dog. "I'm going to get you home." The dog's tail, a battered, bloodied thing, twitched once, the faintest wag, and in that small gesture, Emma found her courage. Emma surveyed the injured German shepherd with determination beyond her years. Uncle Jackson had taught her that in survival situations, you had to be practical. The dog probably weighed 80 pounds or more, far too heavy for her 8-year-old frame to carry. "I need to figure this out," she said aloud, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "I can't leave you here." The dog's amber eyes followed her as she paced the small clearing, thinking. Its breathing had become more labored in the short time she'd been with it, each inhale a painful-sounding rattle. Emma knelt beside the shepherd again, gently stroking the fur between its ears, one of the few places not marked by wounds. "I'm going to call you Maverick," she decided. "Uncle Jackson says that's what they call someone brave who doesn't follow the rules, and you must be really brave to have survived. Whatever happened to you," Maverick responded with the slightest pressure against her hand, as if accepting the name. After several attempts to help Maverick stand, each ending with the dog collapsing back to the ground with pitiful whimpers, Emma realized she needed a different approach. The makeshift bandages from her flannel shirt were already soaked through with blood in places. Time was running out. "Wait here," she told Maverick, then almost laughed at the absurdity of her words. The dog clearly wasn't going anywhere on its own. Emma searched the surrounding area, remembering Uncle Jackson's lessons about improvising in the wilderness. She gathered several sturdy branches about the length of her arm, along with some smaller, more flexible ones. Returning to Maverick, she laid them out on the ground. "I'm going to make a travois," she explained to the dog. "It's like a sled that doesn't need snow. Uncle Jackson showed me pictures in his books about Native Americans." Working quickly, Emma used the remaining strips of her flannel shirt to lash the branches together into a rough triangle. For the bed of the travois, she removed her red jacket and stretched it across the frame, securing it at multiple points. The result was far from perfect. Jackson would have laughed at the crooked angles and clumsy knots, but it was the best she could manage. "Okay, Maverick," Emma said, moving back to the injured dog. "This might hurt, but I need to get you onto this." The process of moving Maverick onto the travois was agonizing for both of them. Despite Emma's care, each shift of the dog's broken body produced whimpers that cut straight to her heart. When Maverick was finally positioned on the makeshift stretcher, his massive head hanging over one edge, Emma took the 2 longest branches that formed the travois' handles and attempted to drag it. The travois moved, but just barely. After 15 minutes of struggling, Emma had only managed to pull Maverick about 20 yards from the clearing. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool autumn air, and her arms felt like lead. "This isn't working," she admitted, dropping to her knees beside Maverick. The dog's breathing had grown more ragged, a pink froth appearing at the corners of its mouth. With a jolt of panic, Emma realized Maverick was dying right before her eyes. Tears blurred her vision as she stroked the dog's head. "Please don't give up," she whispered. "I don't know which way to go. I don't even know where we are." As if in response to her despair, the sky darkened. Looking up, Emma saw clouds gathering overhead, heavy and gray. The breeze that had been pleasantly cool all morning took on a sharper edge. "Great," she muttered. "Rain is all we need now." The first drops began to fall as Emma sat beside Maverick, uncertain which direction to drag her precious cargo. The forest looked the same in every direction, endless trees stretching into shadow. She'd completely lost track of where she'd come from, and the blackberry picking trail, with its blue blazes, seemed a distant memory. "I'm sorry," she told Maverick, a sob catching in her throat. "I don't know what to do." And then, as if summoning strength from some hidden reserve, Maverick lifted his massive head. Despite his grievous injuries, the German shepherd's eyes had cleared somewhat, a spark of intelligence shining through the pain. With visible effort, he tried to rise. "No!" Emma cried, attempting to keep him still. "You'll hurt yourself more." But Maverick was determined. After several failed attempts that left fresh blood seeping through the makeshift bandages, the dog managed to stand on 3 legs, keeping his weight off the broken one. He swayed dangerously, and Emma rushed to support him, pressing her small body against his to keep him upright. "What are you doing?" she asked, bewildered by this sudden change. Maverick turned his head in a specific direction, then took a single, agonizing step forward before his strength gave out. He collapsed back onto the travois with a yelp that turned into a wheezing cough. But his eyes remained fixed on the same direction. Emma followed his gaze. There was nothing visibly different about that section of forest, yet Maverick's focus was unwavering. You want to go that way?" she asked incredulously. The dog's tail moved in the faintest suggestion of a wag. "But how do you know? How can you possibly know which way to go?" In answer, Maverick simply stared in the chosen direction, then back at Emma, his message clear even without words. "Trust me." Emma hesitated only a moment before repositioning the travois and beginning to drag it in the direction Maverick had indicated. It was still brutally hard work. The forest floor was uneven, scattered with rocks and fallen branches that caught on the makeshift sled. The gathering rain made the ground slippery and soaked through Emma's remaining clothes, chilling her to the bone. Yet something had changed. Whether it was Maverick's apparent certainty or simply having any direction to follow, Emma found new strength. She established a rhythm drag for 20 steps, rest for 10 seconds, drag again. During the brief rests, she would check on Maverick, whose eyes remained alert despite his deteriorating condition. "Who were you before all this?" Emma asked during one such break, sheltering from the intensifying rain beneath a large oak. "You must have belonged to someone. You're too smart to be just a regular dog." Maverick's eyes met hers with an almost human understanding that both comforted and unsettled her. As they continued their slow journey, Emma found herself talking more, partly to distract herself from her aching muscles and growing hunger, partly to keep Maverick engaged and conscious. "The kids at school call me Mouse," she confided as she navigated around a fallen log. "They say I'm too quiet and weird because I like books more than TikTok. Bryce Matthews put gum in my hair last year, and Mom had to cut it all off." She paused to wipe rain from her eyes. "I looked like a boy for months." Maverick made a soft sound that, in Emma's imagination at least, seemed sympathetic. Mom says I'll grow into my personality, whatever that means. She says being quiet isn't a bad thing, but I see how she worries when I don't get invited to birthday parties. The rain began to ease, but the damage was done. Emma was soaked through, her teeth chattering. Worse, the travois had become waterlogged, making it even heavier to pull. She was losing daylight, too. The cloud cover and dense forest canopy created a premature twilight. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Emma finally admitted aloud, her voice breaking. It was then, in that moment of despair, that she remembered something Uncle Jackson had mentioned offhandedly during one of their walks. The cabin's water came from a natural spring higher up the mountain, channeled through an old pipeline that ran downhill to the cabin. If she could find that pipeline— "Maverick," she exclaimed, "I know how to find our way. We need to look for the water pipe." With renewed determination, Emma began scanning the forest floor, knowing the pipe would be partially buried but might be visible in places where erosion had exposed it. For the next half-hour, she dragged the travois in what she hoped was a path that would intersect with the pipeline, stopping frequently to examine the ground. Maverick's condition continued to worsen. The pink froth around his mouth had taken on a darker tinge, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. Twice he lost consciousness completely, only to revive when Emma called his name with increasing desperation. "Stay with me," she begged during one such episode, her face close to his. "Please, Maverick. We're going to find help." The dog's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his new name, focusing on Emma with visible effort. "That's it," she encouraged. "You're the bravest dog in the whole world. Braver than any human I know, too." Just as the last light was fading from the sky, Emma's foot struck something hard and cylindrical, partially buried in the forest floor. Dropping to her knees, she brushed away leaves and dirt to reveal a cast-iron pipe about 6 inches in diameter. "I found it!" she cried, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Maverick, I found the water pipe. This leads straight to Uncle Jackson's cabin." Maverick's response was a feeble thump of his tail against the travois, but it was enough to send fresh determination coursing through Emma. Following the direction of the pipeline, she resumed dragging the travois with renewed vigor. The going was still painfully slow. Every few minutes, Emma had to stop and verify she was still following the pipeline where it disappeared underground. The darkness made it increasingly difficult, forcing her to feel her way more than see. The forest, friendly and magical in daylight, had transformed into a maze of looming shadows and unsettling sounds. "Almost there," Emma repeated like a mantra, though she had no idea how much farther they had to go. "Almost there, Maverick. Just hang on." When Maverick lost consciousness again, not even Emma's voice could rouse him. Panic clawed at her throat as she pressed her ear to his chest, relieved to hear the faint but steady thump of his heart. "Don't you dare die," she whispered fiercely. "Not after all this. Not when we're so close." And so they continued through the gathering darkness, a lost little girl dragging a dying dog along a pipeline that represented their only hope of salvation. Her small voice, the only sound besides the dripping of rain from the leaves above, and the rasp of Maverick's labored breathing. The night closed in around Emma like a smothering blanket. Each step became a battle against exhaustion. Her small hands, raw and blistered from gripping the travois handles. Still, she followed the pipeline, occasionally dropping to her knees to confirm she was on the right track when the ancient iron disappeared beneath years of accumulated forest debris. "You know what, Maverick?" Emma's voice cut through the darkness, more to keep herself company than anything else. The German shepherd had been unconscious for nearly 20 minutes now. "I think you must have been really important before whatever happened to you." She paused to rest, her shoulders burning from the strain. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the canopy above, each cold drop making her flinch. "Maybe you were a police dog. I saw a demonstration once at school. The officer said German shepherds are the smartest dogs in the world." She glanced back at Maverick's still form. "That would explain why you knew which way to go." In the silence that followed, Emma's mind wandered to darker places. What had happened to this magnificent animal? The wounds covering Maverick's body weren't from an accident or a single fight. They told a story of sustained cruelty that even her 8-year-old mind could recognize. "Monsters," she whispered, anger momentarily overcoming her exhaustion. "Only monsters would hurt you like this." 2 years earlier, in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Richmond, a very different Maverick stood at attention beside Officer James Harlow. His coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his posture alert and proud as he completed the final phase of his K9 certification. "Best tracking scores I've seen in 15 years, remarked the training supervisor, reviewing the charts. "And his protection work is exceptional. You've got yourself a remarkable partner." "Harlow," James smiled, reaching down to scratch behind Maverick's ears. "Knew it from the day I picked him from the litter. Something special about this one." Maverick registered officially as Sentinel's Maverick 5 had just turned 3, the prime of life for a working police dog. The bond between handler and dog was palpable. Where James went, Maverick followed, his attentive eyes rarely leaving his partner's face. That night, after celebratory beers with his fellow officers, James secured Maverick in the department's state-of-the-art kennel facility. The dog would remain there for the weekend while James attended his sister's wedding 2 states away. "Just for 2 days, buddy," James promised, giving Maverick a final pat. "Then we start our first official shift together. You and me, making the world a little safer." Maverick whined softly as James walked away, a sound of protest rather than distress. Neither could have known it would be the last time they saw each other. The theft was professional and targeted. The perpetrators knew exactly which security cameras to disable, which locks to pick, which dogs to take. By morning, 3 of the department's most valuable K9s, including the newly certified Maverick, had vanished without a trace. Maverick's first introduction to his new reality came in the form of a cattle prod. Confused and disoriented after hours in a cramped transport crate, he lunged toward the unfamiliar men who opened the door only to be met with a jolt of electricity that sent him crashing against the back of the cage. "This one's got spirit," remarked a heavy-set man with nicotine-stained fingers. "Military training by the looks of him. He'll fetch top dollar once we've broken him." "Police dog," corrected his companion, a wiry man with cold, calculating eyes. "See the tattoo in his ear, Richmond PD? We'll need to be careful with this one. They'll be looking hard. That's why we're taking him across state lines. By the time we're done, he won't remember his own name, let alone his training." The breaking process began immediately. Starvation, isolation, random punishments all designed to dismantle the confident, well-adjusted police dog and rebuild him as something else entirely. Maverick resisted longer than most, his training and intelligence working against his captor's efforts to turn him vicious. For weeks, he refused to attack the smaller, weaker dogs they placed in the training pit with him. Each refusal earned him a beating. Each act of defiance was met with escalating cruelty. "Never seen one hold out this long," admitted the wiry man after a particularly brutal session that left Maverick bloodied but unbowed. "Might have to cut our losses with this one." "Give me one more week," insisted his partner. "Every dog breaks eventually. Just got to find the right trigger." The trigger came in the form of a contraption that looked like a medieval torture device, a tight collar connected to a remote control that delivered increasingly powerful shocks. Combined with injections of a cocktail of steroids and stimulants, the electrical punishment finally achieved what beatings alone could not. 6 weeks after his abduction, Maverick entered the fighting pit a changed animal. Gone was the disciplined police dog, replaced by a creature driven by artificially induced rage and the desperate need to survive. His first official fight lasted less than 4 minutes. His opponent, a mixed breed with less training and lower quality conditioning, never stood a chance. As Maverick stood victorious over his fallen adversary, blood dripping from his muzzle, something deep inside him, some essential piece of who he had been, finally broke. The men watching from beyond the pit cheered and exchanged money, oblivious to the psychological death that had just occurred alongside the physical violence. Over the next 2 years, Maverick became a legend in underground fighting circles across 3 states, known simply as the Ghost for his pale coloring and silent fighting style. He racked up victory after victory. Each fight added new scars to his body. Each kill further buried the noble animal he had once been. Until the night everything changed, the night when, during transport to a major fighting event, the truck carrying Maverick and 2 other fighting dogs crashed on a rain-slicked mountain road. The impact burst open Maverick's transport crate, and through a twisted opening in the vehicle's side, the German Shepherd caught his first glimpse of freedom in over 2 years. Injured from the crash and weakened from a recent fight, Maverick nevertheless seized the opportunity. He squeezed through the jagged metal opening, ignoring the deep cut it tore along his flank, and disappeared into the darkness of the Appalachian forest. Behind him, he could hear the shouts of the men, the slam of car doors, the ominous click of firearms being readied. But ahead lay something Maverick had forgotten existed: open space, unconfined by chain-link fences or concrete walls. The primal instinct for survival, the only part of his original training that remained intact, drove him deeper into the woods. For 3 days, Maverick ran, stopping only when his body gave out completely. The wound in his side festered, joining countless others that had never properly healed. Hunger gnawed at him, but he was too weak to hunt. When he finally collapsed in a small clearing, unable to take another step, Maverick surrendered to what seemed inevitable. And then, like a mirage, a small figure with golden hair appeared at the edge of his fading vision. Emma jolted back to the present as her foot caught on an exposed root, nearly sending her tumbling. She managed to keep her grip on the travois, but the sudden movement caused Maverick to stir, a pained whimper escaping his throat. "I'm sorry," she gasped, regaining her balance. "We're still going. We're not giving up." The forest had become a nightmare landscape of reaching shadows and unseen obstacles. Emma's world had narrowed to the few feet of ground ahead of her and the periodic reassurance of the iron pipeline beneath her fingers. Her legs trembled with each step, and her empty stomach clenched painfully, reminding her that breakfast had been her last meal, just when Emma thought she couldn't go any farther. The trees ahead seemed to thin, summoning her last reserves of strength. She pulled the travois forward, emerging suddenly onto the bank of a swollen stream. The rushing water, amplified by the recent rain, roared in the darkness. "No," Emma whispered, despair washing over her. "No, no, no." The pipeline disappeared beneath the stream, obviously continuing on the other side. But the water, normally a gentle brook that Uncle Jackson had shown her how to cross on stepping stones, had transformed into a churning current at least 15 feet across. Emma sank to her knees beside Maverick, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do," she admitted to the unconscious dog. "I can't carry you across that." For several minutes, she simply sat there, exhaustion and hopelessness overwhelming her. Then, remembering Uncle Jackson's constant refrain, "There's always a way if you're smart enough to find it," Emma forced herself to think. The stream was too dangerous to wade across while pulling the travois. Swimming was out of the question. The current would sweep them both away. What she needed was a bridge, or a raft, Emma said aloud, the idea taking shape. "We need a raft." With renewed purpose, she began searching the stream bank for fallen wood. Most of it was too waterlogged from the rain to be useful. But eventually, she located several large pieces of dead wood that still felt relatively dry in the center. Dragging them back to Maverick one by one, Emma arranged them into a rough rectangle, using the remainder of her jacket and the flexible branches from the travois. She lashed the logs together as securely as her frozen fingers would allow. The result was crude, but, she hoped, buoyant enough to support Maverick's weight for the short crossing. "This is going to work," Emma told herself firmly. "It has to work." Getting Maverick onto the makeshift raft was even more difficult than the original transfer to the travois had been. The dog was dead weight now, completely unresponsive even when Emma inadvertently pressed against his broken leg. Finally, with a combination of pulling and rolling that left Emma gasping for breath, Maverick lay centered on the raft. Emma tested the craft at the edge of the stream, relieved when it floated despite the weight. Her plan was simple. She would wade beside the raft in the shallower water, guiding it across while using the current to help carry Maverick's weight. "Here we go," she whispered, pushing the raft into the stream while maintaining a firm grip on one of the protruding branches. The first few feet went according to plan. The water was shockingly cold, but only knee-deep, and the raft moved smoothly with the current while Emma guided it from the side. But as they reached the middle of the stream, where the water ran fastest, two disasters struck simultaneously. First, the depth dropped suddenly, the water rising to Emma's chest in a single step. The shock of the cold stole her breath and nearly made her lose her grip on the raft. Second, one of the lashings gave way, causing the front of the raft to begin breaking apart. "No!" Emma cried, lunging for the raft as it started to tip, sending Maverick's unconscious form sliding toward the water. In her desperation to save the dog, Emma lost her footing on the slippery stream bed. The current, stronger than she had anticipated, swept her feet out from under her. For a terrifying moment, her head went under water, the roar of the stream replaced by a muffled silence. When she surfaced, gasping, both she and what remained of the raft were being carried downstream. "Maverick!" she screamed, seeing the German shepherd's body slip into the churning water. Pure adrenaline gave Emma strength beyond her years, swimming with the current rather than against it. She managed to reach Maverick just as his head was about to go under. Grabbing a handful of his thick fur, she fought to keep both their heads above water as the stream carried them along. Emma had no control over their direction, no way to guide them back to shore. All she could do was hold on to Maverick and try to keep them both afloat. The cold was numbing her limbs, making it increasingly difficult to maintain her grip. "Please," she sobbed between gasps for air. "Please help us," as if in answer to her desperate prayer. A fallen tree appeared ahead, its branches extending into the stream. With her last bit of strength, Emma maneuvered them toward it, managing to catch hold of a sturdy branch as they swept past. The sudden stop nearly tore Maverick from her grasp, but Emma held on with grim determination. Inch by painful inch, she pulled them toward the bank, fighting the current that tried to drag them back into its grasp. When her feet finally touched bottom, Emma sobbed with relief. With one final Herculean effort, she dragged Maverick onto the muddy shore before collapsing beside him. Both were soaked to the skin, covered in mud, and in Maverick's case, bleeding from reopened wounds. "We made it," Emma whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure where it was. The pipeline was lost, their direction uncertain. For all she knew, the stream had carried them even farther from Uncle Jackson's cabin. As she lay there, shivering violently in the darkness, Emma felt something warm against her cheek. Opening her eyes, she found Maverick's muzzle pressed against her face. The dog was conscious again. His amber eyes focused on her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Maverick," she gasped. "You're awake." The German shepherd made a soft sound, then, with visible effort, began to drag himself up the bank away from the stream. After a few feet, he stopped and looked back at Emma, clearly expecting her to follow. "You still want to lead the way?" Emma asked incredulously. "After all that?" Maverick's answer was to continue his painful progress away from the stream. With a groan, Emma forced her exhausted body to move, crawling rather than walking as she followed the dog. To her amazement, after about 20 yards, Maverick stopped at a familiar sight, the iron pipeline, emerging from the ground where the stream had exposed it on this side of the crossing. "You found it!" Emma exclaimed. "You wonderful, smart dog!" Maverick's tail moved in the weakest of wags before his legs gave out, and he collapsed once more. This time, when Emma checked, his breathing was so shallow she could barely detect it, and his body felt cool to the touch despite his thick fur. "No, no, no," Emma pleaded, gathering the dog's massive head into her lap. "Don't give up now. We're so close. I know we are." But Maverick's eyes remained closed, his body limp. The stream crossing had depleted his last reserves of strength. Without immediate help, Emma knew instinctively that he wouldn't survive much longer. Forcing her frozen limbs to move, Emma stood on wobbly legs. The travois was gone, lost to the stream. There was no way she could carry Maverick, and dragging him in his current state might kill him faster. "I have to get help," she realized aloud. The thought of leaving Maverick alone, possibly to die while she was gone, brought fresh tears to her eyes. But staying with him meant they would both likely perish in the cold, dark forest. Emma knelt beside Maverick once more, placing her small hand on his chest to feel the faint beating of his heart. "I'm going to find Uncle Jackson," she promised. "I'll bring help. Just please be alive when I get back." With a final glance at the injured dog, Emma turned to follow the pipeline, breaking into a stumbling run. Her waterlogged sneakers squished with each step. Her wet clothes clung to her shivering body. But a new determination drove her forward. "Help!" she began to call as she ran. "Uncle Jackson! Anybody! Help us!" Her voice, small and hoarse from exhaustion, seemed to be swallowed by the vastness of the forest. But Emma continued calling, continued following the pipeline, continued believing that somehow, against all odds, she would find help in time to save the brave dog who had fought so hard to survive. Jackson Harlow checked his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. It was nearly 2:00 p.m., 2 full hours passed when Emma should have returned from berry picking. The cobbler ingredient sat untouched on the kitchen counter, a silent accusation. "Damn it all," he muttered, pacing the length of the small cabin. He'd told himself not to worry. Kids lost track of time. She'd probably found a patch of particularly good berries or stopped to watch squirrels. But the gnawing feeling in his gut, the same one that had saved his life more than once in Afghanistan, wouldn't be silenced. When the rain had started an hour ago, Jackson had pulled on his raincoat and grabbed his rifle, ready to head out in search of his grandniece. But years of experience in these mountains had stayed his hand. Searching the vast forest in a rainstorm was a fool's errand, more likely to result in 2 lost people than 1 found child. Better to wait until the rain passed, then follow the marked trail methodically. Now, with the rain reduced to a gentle patter on the cabin's metal roof, Jackson could wait no longer. He loaded his pack with emergency supplies, first aid kit, emergency blanket, extra flashlight, water, and high-calorie protein bars, and slung his rifle over his shoulder. After a moment's consideration, he added a thermos of hot chocolate. Emma would be cold and frightened. The familiar comfort might help. Should have never let her go alone, he berated himself as he pulled on a waterproof jacket and tucked a detailed topographical map into its pocket. City kid in mountain country. What was I thinking? The self-recrimination continued as Jackson stepped onto the cabin's porch and surveyed the darkening forest. Evening was approaching faster than usual, the heavy cloud cover accelerating twilight's arrival. He had perhaps 3 hours of usable daylight left, not much time to cover the miles of trail that Emma might have wandered. With practiced efficiency, Jackson verified the emergency whistle around his neck and switched on his high-powered flashlight. A final check of his gear, and he was off, moving with the purposeful stride of a man who knew exactly how dangerous these mountains could be after nightfall. The trail was easy enough to follow, even with the rain having washed away some of the lighter footprints. Jackson found Emma's tracks heading out that morning, the small sneaker prints clear in several muddy patches. He followed them for half a mile until he reached the main berry patch, a sprawling thicket where the blue blazes marking the trail curved back toward the cabin. But Emma's footprints didn't follow the blazes back. Instead, they veered off to the right, following what appeared to be butterfly tracks. Jackson crouched, examining the ground carefully. Yes, his grandniece had abandoned the safety of the marked trail to chase butterflies. His heart sank as he realized how far she might have wandered. "Emma," he called, his deep voice carrying through the trees. Emma Calloway. Only the dripping of rainwater from leaves and the distant call of a crow answered him. For the next hour, Jackson tracked Emma's increasingly erratic path through the forest. The prints showed she had moved from one berry patch to another, straying further from the trail with each diversion. Then, near a small clearing, the tracks changed. The even stride became a shuffle, with scrape marks in the soft earth suggesting something heavy being dragged. Jackson's military training kicked in as he surveyed the clearing. Signs of a struggle. No, not quite, but something had happened here. He spotted a small woven basket tipped on its side, blackberries scattered and crushed into the mud. Nearby lay Emma's canteen, the green canvas damp but intact. "What the hell happened here? Half pint?" Jackson muttered, using his nickname for Emma as he knelt to examine the ground more carefully. That's when he saw the blood. Small dark patches, already diluted by rain but unmistakable to his experienced eye. Not a large amount, but enough to send a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the damp weather. Beside the blood, a different set of prints caught his attention. Not human animal. Large paw prints that could only belong to a sizable dog or wolf. Jackson felt his mouth go dry. Wolves were rare in these parts, but not unheard of. And a child alone, perhaps injured. "No," he said aloud, refusing to follow that train of thought. "She's okay. Has to be." The tracks told a confusing story. The dog prints and what appeared to be Emma's footprints moved away from the clearing together, along with those strange drag marks. Was she running from the animal being pursued? Or Jackson squinted at the tracks again. Was she somehow helping it? Following the trail became more difficult as the light faded further. Jackson relied increasingly on his flashlight, sweeping its beam back and forth across the forest floor to catch any sign of his grandniece. The prints led in a seemingly random direction, neither following the pipeline nor any natural feature that might help Emma orient herself. Then, suddenly, the trail vanished at the edge of a steep ravine. Jackson played his light down the slope, heart hammering against his ribs. Had she fallen? But no. After a tense moment of searching, he located where the tracks resumed at the bottom, showing that Emma had made her way down carefully. "Good girl," he breathed. "Smart girl." Jackson had just started down the ravine himself when he heard it so faint he almost mistook it for the wind, a child's voice calling for help. "Emma," he shouted, freezing in place to listen. "Emma!" The voice came again, stronger this time. "Uncle Jackson, help. Please help." Jackson abandoned caution, half running, half sliding down the ravine toward the sound of Emma's voice. His flashlight beam bounced wildly, illuminating patches of undergrowth and tree trunks in a disorienting strobe effect. At the bottom, he paused just long enough to get his bearings before charging in the direction of Emma's continued calls. "Keep shouting, half pint," he yelled. "I'm coming." The voice led him to the stream, normally placid, but now a surging current after the rain. Jackson cursed under his breath. Had Emma tried to cross? The thought sent a spike of fear through him until he heard her voice again, closer now, and coming from his right. Swinging his flashlight in that direction, Jackson finally caught sight of her, a small, bedraggled figure emerging from between two large boulders. Her clothes were soaked and torn, her face smeared with mud and tears, but she was alive and moving under her own power. "Uncle Jackson," Emma cried when his flashlight beam found her. She broke into a stumbling run toward him. Jackson closed the distance between them in a few long strides, dropping to one knee to catch her as she flung herself against him. She was shivering violently, her skin cold to the touch despite the exertion. "Jesus Christ, Emma," he said, his gruff voice cracking with emotion as he wrapped his jacket around her. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Not me," Emma gasped between chattering teeth. "Maverick. He's hurt really bad. You have to help him." Maverick, Jackson frowned in confusion. "Who's Maverick?" "The dog," Emma explained urgently, tugging at his sleeve. "The dog I found. He's dying. Uncle Jackson, we have to hurry." Jackson's initial relief at finding Emma unharmed gave way to a different concern. A wild dog, possibly dangerous, somewhere in these woods, and Emma had been trying to help it. "Emma, listen to me," he said firmly, holding her at arm's length to look into her eyes. "Was this dog aggressive? Did it threaten you? Is that why there was blood in the clearing?" "No." Emma's vehemence surprised him. "He's hurt. Someone hurt him really bad. He has cuts all over, and his leg is broken, and he saved me when we fell in the stream, and he's going to die if we don't help him right now." The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. Whatever this dog was, Emma clearly believed it needed immediate help. Jackson hesitated, torn between getting his grandniece safely back to the cabin and investigating this mysterious animal. "Please," Emma begged, tears streaming down her face. "I promised I'd bring help. I promised him." Jackson sighed, recognizing the look of stubborn determination that reminded him so much of his sister Emma's grandmother. "All right," he conceded. "Show me where he is. But," he added, raising a cautionary finger, "if this dog shows any sign of aggression, we're leaving it. Understood?" Emma nodded vigorously, already turning to lead the way. "He won't hurt anyone. He's a good dog. The best dog." Following Emma back along the pipeline, Jackson kept his flashlight trained on the ground ahead, alert for any sign of movement in the surrounding forest. The stream crossing had disoriented him somewhat. They were on a section of his property he rarely visited, where the pipeline ran through a particularly dense stretch of woodland before emerging near the cabin's back clearing. "There," Emma suddenly exclaimed, pointing ahead. "He's right there." Jackson swung his flashlight in the direction she indicated and caught his breath. Lying motionless beside the pipeline was one of the largest German shepherds he'd ever seen, or what was left of one. Even from a distance, he could tell the animal was in horrific condition. Its coat was matted with blood and mud, its body a road map of wounds both old and new. One hind leg lay at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. "Good God," Jackson muttered, approaching cautiously. What happened to this animal? As the beam of his flashlight fell across the dog's face, its eyes flickered open, amber irises reflecting the light with an almost supernatural glow. A low growl rumbled from its throat, cut short by a wheezing cough that brought pinkish foam to its lips. "It's okay, Maverick," Emma said, darting forward before Jackson could stop her. She knelt beside the massive dog, placing one small hand gently on its head. "This is my uncle. He's going to help you." To Jackson's amazement, the growl subsided as Emma spoke. The dog's eyes, intelligent and pain-filled, moved from the child to him, assessing. "Careful, Emma," Jackson warned, keeping his distance. "That dog's badly injured. Might lash out without meaning to." "He won't?" Emma insisted with the absolute certainty only children can muster. "He's special." Jackson approached slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. As a former combat medic, he'd seen his share of injuries, but the state of this animal shocked even him. This wasn't the result of an accident or a fight with another wild animal. These wounds spoke of something far more sinister, deliberate, sustained abuse. "Someone did this to him," Jackson said, anger coloring his voice as he knelt on the dog's other side. "This ain't natural injuries." "I know," Emma replied solemnly. I think they made him fight other dogs." Jackson's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of dog-fighting rings operating in the counties bordering the national forest, brutal operations that law enforcement seemed perpetually one step behind shutting down. As he examined the dog more closely, Jackson noticed something that made him freeze. Partially hidden by matted fur and dried blood was a tattoo inside the animal's ear, a series of numbers and letters in a format he recognized instantly from his military days. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed, gently turning the ear to see the marking better in the flashlight beam. "This ain't just any dog, Emma. This is a military-trained dog. Or maybe police." "Really?" Emma's eyes widened. "That's why he's so smart, I knew it." Jackson nodded, his assessment of the situation changing rapidly. This wasn't some random stray or wild animal. This was a highly trained service dog that had somehow ended up in the hands of criminals. The thought made his blood boil. "He needs immediate medical attention," Jackson said, making a quick decision. "He's got internal bleeding, probably pneumonia setting in from the fluid in his lungs, and that leg needs proper setting." "Can you help him?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. Jackson met her eyes, seeing the desperation there. He couldn't lie to her. "I don't know. Half pint. He's in real bad shape. But we're going to try." With practiced efficiency, Jackson removed the emergency blanket from his pack and spread it on the ground beside the dog. "We need to move him onto this. It'll be easier to carry him that way." Together, they managed to roll the massive German Shepherd onto the reflective blanket. The dog, Maverick, as Emma had named him, offered no resistance, though a high whine escaped when they jostled his broken leg. "I'm sorry, boy," Jackson murmured, surprised at how quickly he'd accepted Emma's conviction that this was a good dog despite its fearsome appearance. Something about the animal's eyes, perhaps a dignity that shone through the pain, using the blanket as a makeshift stretcher. Jackson took the heavier end near the dog's head, while Emma held the corners by Maverick's hind legs, even distributed between them. The weight was substantial. Jackson realized with grim admiration how far Emma must have dragged this animal on her own. "Lead the way with the flashlight," Jackson instructed, handing Emma the light. "Follow the pipeline. It'll take us straight back to the cabin." As they began their slow journey through the darkened forest, Jackson looked down at the injured dog between them and then at his determined grandniece, illuminated in the bobbing flashlight beam. What Emma had accomplished today, finding this dog, attempting to save it, surviving the stream crossing, finding her way back to the pipeline, was nothing short of remarkable. "You did good, Emma," he said quietly. "Real good. Not many grown folks would have done what you did today." Emma's face, streaked with dirt and tears, brightened at the praise. "We're going to save him. Right, Uncle Jackson?" Looking at the grievously injured animal between them, Jackson wasn't sure that was a promise he could keep, but the hope in Emma's eyes was something he couldn't bear to extinguish. "We're going to give it our best shot," he replied, "and Harlows don't quit. Do we?" "No, sir," Emma agreed, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "We don't quit." The makeshift emergency room that Jackson had created in his cabin's main living area bore little resemblance to the cozy space where he and Emma had eaten breakfast that morning. The worn leather couch had been stripped of its cushions and covered with plastic sheeting and clean towels. Mason jars filled with various homemade tinctures and medical supplies from Jackson's Army days lined the coffee table. The fireplace blazed, raising the cabin's temperature to near uncomfortable levels necessary to combat the hypothermia that threatened both Emma and the massive German shepherd. "Hold the light steady," Jackson instructed Emma, who stood beside him, wrapped in 3 layers of dry clothing and clutching a flashlight aimed at Maverick's ravaged body. Emma hadn't left the dog's side since they'd arrived at the cabin 40 minutes earlier. Jackson had attempted to send her for a hot shower and change of clothes, but she'd refused to budge until she was certain Maverick wouldn't die the moment she turned her back. Only after extracting a solemn promise from her uncle that he wouldn't give up on the dog had she agreed to quickly change into the dry clothes he'd laid out for her. "Is he going to be okay?" Emma asked for perhaps the 20th time, her voice hoarse from crying. Jackson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he focused on inserting an IV catheter into the German shepherd's foreleg, a skill he hadn't used since Afghanistan, but which came back with muscle memory. The dog was so dehydrated that his veins had nearly collapsed, making the procedure far more difficult than it should have been. "There," Jackson muttered with satisfaction as he finally hit the vein and secured the catheter with medical tape. He connected a bag of lactated Ringer's solution part of his emergency medical supplies that he rotated regularly out of habit and hung it from a makeshift stand created from a coat rack. "Is that helping him?" Emma pressed, her eyes fixed on the clear liquid now flowing into Maverick's body. "It's a start," Jackson admitted, straightening to survey his patient, "replacing fluids he's lost. But, Emma—" He hesitated, not wanting to crush her hopes, but needing her to understand the gravity of the situation. "This dog needs a real vet. He's got injuries I can't properly treat." "But the vet's office is closed," Emma protested. "You said so yourself. And the emergency animal hospital is 2 hours away." "I know. Half pint." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "That's why I called Mike Dougherty. Remember I told you about him, Army buddy of mine who became a veterinarian after he got out? Lives about an hour from here. Is he coming?" Emma's face lit with renewed hope. "He's trying. Roads are bad after the rain." Jackson didn't add that Mike had sounded doubtful about whether any dog in the condition he'd described would still be alive by the time he arrived. Turning back to Maverick, Jackson continued his assessment. The broken leg would need proper setting, but that could wait. More pressing were the multiple deep lacerations across the dog's body, particularly a nasty gash along his flank that had reopened during their journey back to the cabin and was now seeping blood at an alarming rate. "Hand me that suture kit," Jackson instructed, pointing to a small metal box among the supplies. As Emma passed it to him, he added, "This is going to be tough to watch. Half pint. Why don't you go put on some water for hot chocolate?" "I'm staying," Emma replied with quiet determination. She squared her small shoulders and met Jackson's gaze unflinchingly. Maverick needs to know he's not alone. Something in her expression, a maturity beyond her 8 years, made Jackson nod in acceptance. "All right, then. But tell me if you start feeling dizzy. No heroes. Remember? For the next 30 minutes. Jackson worked methodically to clean and suture the worst of Maverick's wounds. The dog remained eerily still throughout the procedure, drifting in and out of consciousness. Only occasionally did a low whimper escape when Jackson's needle pierced particularly sensitive tissue. "He's so brave," Emma whispered, gently stroking the top of Maverick's head, one of the few places not marked by wounds. "He doesn't even cry when it must hurt so bad. Military dogs are trained that way," Jackson explained, tying off another suture. "To stay quiet, even when injured." "How do you know he's really a military dog?" Emma asked. Jackson gestured toward the tattoo inside Maverick's ear. "That marking, it's a specific format used for service dogs. Military, police, search and rescue, they're all tagged that way for identification. So he belongs to someone," Emma's voice caught. "Someone's looking for him." "Maybe." Jackson didn't elaborate further. The truth was more complicated. Given the dog's condition and the apparent length of time he'd been subjected to abuse, it was likely his original handler had given up the search long ago. Lost or stolen service dogs were rarely recovered after extended periods. As Jackson finished suturing the last major wound, Maverick's breathing suddenly changed, becoming more labored, with a rattling sound that experienced medics recognized all too well. "What's happening?" Emma asked, alarm spreading across her face. "His lungs are filling with fluid," Jackson explained tersely, reaching for his stethoscope. "Probably pneumonia from inhaling water during that stream crossing you told me about. Or could be internal bleeding." He listened to Maverick's chest, his expression growing grimmer by the second. "Both lungs compromised," he muttered. "Needs antibiotics and probably a chest tube, neither of which I have." "What can we do?" Emma's voice trembled. "Elevate his head," Jackson instructed, grabbing a folded blanket to prop under Maverick's massive skull. "Might help him breathe easier." But the dog's condition continued to deteriorate rapidly. His gums, which should have been pink, had taken on a bluish tinge, a sign of inadequate oxygen. Each breath came as a struggled gasp, and the pink-tinged foam at his mouth had returned, this time with streaks of darker red. "No, no, no," Emma chanted, tears streaming down her face as she knelt closer to Maverick. "Please don't die. Please don't die. You can't die after everything. It's not fair." Jackson stood helplessly by, his medical training telling him what was happening but offering no solutions. Without proper equipment and medications, there was little he could do to halt the dog's decline. The sound of tires on gravel outside sent a surge of hope through the cabin. "That'll be Mike," Jackson said. hurrying to the door. The man who strode into the cabin moments later carried the confident air of someone used to emergency situations. Mike Dougherty was shorter than Jackson but broader, with a shaved head and goatee peppered with gray. He dropped a large medical bag on the floor and moved immediately to the makeshift examination table without waiting for introductions. "This the patient?" he asked briskly, already pulling on examination gloves. "German Shepherd, male, unknown age but likely 4 to 6 years," Jackson reported in the clipped tones of a military briefing. "Multiple lacerations and puncture wounds in various stages of healing. Compound fracture, left hind leg. Probable pneumonia or hemothorax. Severe dehydration and malnutrition." Mike nodded, his experienced hands already moving over Maverick's body. "Dog fighting," he said grimly. "Seen it before. Too many times." Emma gasped at the confirmation of her fears. "People made him fight other dogs on purpose." Mike glanced at her, then at Jackson, clearly weighing how much to say in front of a child. "Yes," he finally answered simply. "Bad people did this." Turning back to his examination, Mike listened to Maverick's chest, checked his pupils, and assessed the sutures Jackson had placed. His expression grew increasingly somber. "It's bad, isn't it?" Emma asked in a small voice. Mike looked directly at her, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Yes, honey, it's bad. His lungs are failing, and he's got what we call septicemia, a severe infection in his bloodstream. But you can fix him, right?" Emma pleaded. "You're a doctor." Mike exchanged a look with Jackson, the weight of their shared experiences in war hanging between them, the knowledge of when injuries passed beyond the point of recovery. "I can try," Mike said gently. "I've brought antibiotics, pain medication, and equipment for a chest tap to remove the fluid. But honestly, with injuries this severe and long-standing—" "Don't say it." Emma's voice rose sharply. "Don't say we should just let him die. He fought so hard to live. He saved me in the stream. He found the pipeline when I was lost. He's special." "Emma," Jackson began, moving to place a steadying hand on her shoulder. "No." She shrugged away from his touch. "You promised. You promised we wouldn't give up on him." The intensity of her outburst filled the small cabin, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. Mike turned back to his medical bag, extracting vials of medication and sterile equipment. "Let me see what I can do," he said quietly. "But Emma, you need to understand sometimes the kindest thing we can do for an animal in this condition is to end their suffering." "He doesn't want to die," Emma insisted, her small face fierce with conviction. "I know he doesn't. He's a fighter." As if responding to her words, Maverick's eyes flickered open. Despite his labored breathing, his gaze found Emma, holding her with surprising clarity given his condition. "See?" Emma whispered, dropping to her knees beside the makeshift table. "He's still in there. He's still fighting." Mike administered a cocktail of medications through the IV that Jackson had established, then began preparing for the thoracentesis, the procedure to drain fluid from around Maverick's lungs. As he worked, the cabin's phone rang, startling everyone. "That'll be your mother," Jackson told Emma. "I called her after we got back. She's probably worried sick." "I'm not talking to her right now," Emma said, not moving from Maverick's side. "She'll just say we need to put him to sleep. That's what grown-ups always say. Jackson sighed but moved to answer the phone in the kitchen area, his voice dropping to a murmur as he explained the situation to his niece Abigail. Left with Emma, Mike continued his work, occasionally glancing at the determined child who refused to leave the dying dog. "You must have been very brave today," he said, as he prepared Maverick's chest for the needle insertion. "Your uncle told me you carried this dog for miles." "I had to," Emma replied simply. "He needed me." Something in her voice, the absolute certainty of a child's compassion, made Mike pause in his preparations. He'd seen this German shepherd's injuries, understood the horrific circumstances that had produced them, recognized the overwhelming odds against recovery, but looking at Emma's unwavering faith, he found himself hoping for a miracle he didn't believe in. "Well, then," he said, picking up the large needle for the thoracentesis, "let's not disappoint him." Dawn broke over the Appalachian foothills, spilling golden light through the cabin's east-facing windows. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor beside the makeshift dog bed they'd created near the fireplace, her small hand resting on Maverick's chest, rising and falling with each of his labored breaths. She hadn't slept. Not really. Dozing occasionally only to jerk awake at the slightest change in the German shepherd's breathing pattern, Uncle Jackson had tried repeatedly to convince her to sleep in the bedroom, but Emma had refused to leave Maverick's side. In the end, Jackson had brought her a pillow and blanket, allowing her to maintain her vigil while he and Mike took turns monitoring the dog's condition throughout the night. The thoracentesis had been successful, draining nearly a pint of bloody fluid from around Maverick's lungs, but Mike had been frank about the prognosis. "We've bought him some time," he told Jackson in hushed tones while Emma pretended not to listen. "But the infection's systemic, without proper hospital care, aggressive antibiotic therapy, possibly surgery." Emma had stopped listening then, focusing instead on sending all her positive thoughts directly into Maverick's battered body. Adults always wanted to give up too easily. They didn't understand that sometimes wanting to live was enough. The sound of tires on gravel outside made Emma sit up straighter. Through the window, she saw her mother's blue Honda pulling up beside Uncle Jackson's truck. Emma's stomach twisted with anxiety. Her mother didn't understand about animals the way Uncle Jackson did. She'd take one look at Maverick and decide he was too far gone, too dangerous, too much trouble. "Emma!" Her mother's voice called from outside, followed by the cabin door opening. Abigail Calloway stood in the doorway, her nurse's scrubs suggesting she'd come directly from her night shift at the hospital. Her face, so like an older version of Emma's, was drawn with worry and fatigue. "Over here," Emma answered softly, not moving from Maverick's side. Abigail crossed the room in quick strides, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. "Oh, Emma," she breathed, pulling the child into a fierce hug. "When your uncle called and said you were lost in the forest," her voice broke, "I've never been so scared in my life." "I'm okay, Mom," Emma assured her, returning the hug briefly before pulling away to check on Maverick. "But he needs help." For the first time, Abigail seemed to fully register the massive German shepherd lying on the blankets. Her eyes widened as she took in the animal's grievous injuries, the IV line still attached to his foreleg, the fresh bandages covering much of his body. "Emma," she said carefully, "your uncle explained about finding this dog, but seeing him now, he's in terrible shape." "His name is Maverick," Emma corrected firmly, "and he saved my life." Jackson appeared from the kitchen area, a mug of coffee in his hand. "Morning, Abby," he greeted his niece. "You made good time." "I left as soon as I got off shift," Abigail replied, standing to accept the coffee gratefully. "The roads were still slick in places." "Mike's catching some sleep in the spare room," Jackson explained, nodding toward the hallway. "Been up all night working on that dog?" Abigail's expression softened with understanding. "Your friend's a veterinarian. 20 years with the Army Veterinary Corps before going into private practice," Jackson confirmed. "If anyone could help, it'd be Mike." Abigail knelt again to examine Maverick more closely, her nurse's training evident in the professional way she assessed his condition without touching him. "Those aren't accidental injuries," she observed quietly. "No, ma'am." Jackson agreed grimly. "Mike says it's dogfighting. Been going on a long time by the looks of those old scars. And the ear tattoo. Military or police training, originally. Someone stole a valuable asset." Emma listened to this exchange with growing apprehension. The adults were talking about Maverick as if he were a thing, a problem to be solved rather than a living being fighting for his life right in front of them. "He understands what we're saying," she interrupted. "He's really smart." Abigail shared a look with Jackson that Emma recognized all too well, the humoring the child look that grown-ups used when they thought kids were being fanciful. "I'm sure he's very intelligent, honey," her mother said gently. "But right now he's extremely ill. We need to think about what's best for him." Emma's face hardened with sudden understanding. "You want to put him to sleep?" It wasn't a question. Abigail sighed, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Emma, sometimes the kindest thing—" "No." Emma pulled away, placing her body protectively between her mother and Maverick. "That's not kind. That's giving up." Maverick didn't give up when he was being hurt by those bad people. He didn't give up when he was lost in the forest. He didn't give up when he was helping me find my way back. Why should we give up on him now? "Emma," Abigail began, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when explaining difficult concepts. "This dog is suffering. I can see it in his breathing pattern, his physical condition. As a nurse, I have to think about quality of life." "You don't know him," Emma insisted, tears forming in her eyes. "You don't know how strong he is." The sound of a door opening interrupted their increasingly tense conversation. Mike emerged from the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, but looking more refreshed than he had a few hours earlier. "Thought I heard voices," he said, nodding a greeting to Abigail. "Mike Doherty, Abigail Calloway. Thank you for helping with—" She gestured toward Maverick, unsure what to call him. "Maverick," Mike supplied with a small smile. "Your daughter named him well. He certainly got the fighting spirit of one." Moving to kneel beside the German shepherd, Mike performed a quick assessment, checking vital signs and examining bandages. To everyone's surprise, Maverick's eyes opened during the examination, tracking Mike's movements with more alertness than he'd shown all night. "Well, look who's decided to join us," Mike remarked, genuine surprise in his voice. "Temperature's down slightly. Breathing's marginally better, too." "See," Emma said triumphantly. "He's getting better." Mike's expression remained cautious. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. He's still critical. But I'll admit, He's responding to the antibiotics better than I expected." "What does that mean?" Abigail asked, her medical training making her precise about prognosis. "It means," Mike replied thoughtfully, "that this dog has a stronger constitution than most I've treated. He should have died in that forest, by all medical logic, then again during the night. The fact that he's still with us, showing small improvements." He shrugged. "It's not quite a miracle, but it's closer than I usually see." For the first time, Maverick shifted position slightly, his amber eyes finding Emma's face. The movement was minimal, a slight adjustment of his massive head, but to Emma, it meant everything. "He knows me," she whispered, leaning closer. "He knows we're trying to help him." Something in that moment, the connection between child and dog, seemed to affect both Mike and Abigail. They exchanged glances, a wordless communication passing between medical professionals. "I'd like to take some blood for testing," Mike finally said. "And he needs radiographs to properly assess that leg and check for other internal injuries. The nearest veterinary hospital with those facilities is in Johnson City," Jackson pointed out. Mike nodded. "I've got colleagues there who owe me favors. If we stabilize him enough for transport—" "Wait," Abigail interrupted, confusion crossing her features. I mean, given his condition, I assumed we were discussing euthanasia." Emma's head snapped up, her expression fierce, but before she could speak, Mike intervened. "That was my initial assessment," he admitted. "But in medicine, human or veterinary, we sometimes encounter cases that defy explanation. This dog should be dead. Mrs. Calloway, the fact that he's showing improvement, however slight, makes me hesitant to recommend euthanasia just yet." "And if he recovers," Abigail pressed, "what then? He's been trained to fight." "He could be dangerous, especially around a child." "No," Emma protested. "He's not dangerous. He protected me in the forest." "Emma," her mother began in that patient but firm tone. "Actually," Mike interjected, "Emma may be right. This dog shows signs of military or police training prior to whatever happened to him. Those dogs aren't inherently aggressive, quite the opposite. They're selected for stable temperaments and trained to respond only to specific commands." "But after what he's been through," Abigail started. "Could cause psychological trauma." "Yes," Mike acknowledged. "But rehabilitated fighting dogs can often return to normal behavior patterns with proper care. And this one—" He paused, looking thoughtfully at Maverick. "There's something about him. The way he protected your daughter suggests his original training is still intact at some level." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside car doors slamming. Voices calling out. Jackson moved to the window, peering through the curtains. "County Sheriff," he reported with surprise. "2 deputies and what looks like a plainclothes detective." Mike and Jackson exchanged puzzled glances. "You called them?" Jackson asked. "Nope," Mike replied. "Though I was planning to report the dogfighting situation once we stabilized the patient." A knock at the door prompted Jackson to answer, revealing Sheriff Donovan Hayes, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Morning, Jackson," the sheriff greeted, removing his hat as he entered. "Mike," he nodded to the veterinarian, suggesting they were acquainted. "What brings you out here?" "Donovan?" Jackson asked, gesturing for the sheriff and his companions, a female deputy and a lean man in a suit, to enter. "Got an interesting call this morning," Hayes explained, his eyes immediately finding Maverick on his makeshift bed. "Ah, so it is him." "You know this dog?" Mike asked sharply. The man in the suit stepped forward, introducing himself. "Detective James Harlow, Richmond Police Department. And yes, I believe I do know this dog, too." At the sound of the detective's voice, Maverick's head lifted slightly, his ears, one still partially torn, attempting to prick forward. A small whine escaped his throat. Detective Harlow's professional demeanor cracked, emotion flooding his features as he moved closer to the injured German shepherd. "Maverick," he said softly, kneeling beside the dog. "Is that you? Boy." To everyone's astonishment, Maverick's tail thumped weakly against the blankets, the first voluntary movement he'd made since being brought to the cabin. "You know, Maverick?" Emma asked, hope and confusion warring in her voice. The detective looked up, seeming to notice the small girl for the first time. "If this is who I think it is. His full name is Sentinels Maverick V. He was my partner in the K-9 unit until he was stolen 2 years ago." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Emma's eyes widened as she looked between the detective and the dog. "You're his person, his real person." Harlow nodded, emotion making his voice rough. "We've been searching for him since he disappeared. Last week, we got a tip about a dogfighting ring operating near the state line. During the investigation, an informant mentioned a legendary fighting dog called the Ghost, a German shepherd with unusual pale coloring who'd recently escaped after a transport vehicle crashed. That must be how he ended up in the forest," Jackson realized aloud. "We've been searching the area for days." Harlow continued, gently placing his hand where Maverick could smell it. The dog's nostrils flared, taking in the once familiar scent. "When Sheriff Hayes called this morning about a severely injured German shepherd with a military tattoo," his voice trailed off as emotion overwhelmed him. "He recognized your voice," Emma said wonderingly. "He knew who you were right away." Harlow smiled through unshed tears. "We were together every day for a year. Trained together, worked together, lived together." He looked more closely at Maverick's injuries, horror crossing his features. "What they did to him?" "It's pretty bad," Mike confirmed soberly. "But he's fighter, and now that we know who he is, we can access his medical records, get a better treatment plan in place." Emma watched this scene unfold with mixed emotions. Joy that Maverick had found his original owner, but growing anxiety about what this meant for her connection to the dog she'd saved. "Does this mean you're taking him away?" she asked in a small voice. Detective Harlow turned to Emma, truly seeing her for the first time. "Your uncle told the sheriff you found Maverick in the forest and carried him for miles to get help. Is that right?" Emma nodded, suddenly shy under the detective's intense gaze. "Then I owe you more than I can ever repay," Harlow said solemnly. "You saved my partner's life, but he saved me too," Emma insisted. "In the stream. And he helped me find my way when I was lost." A look of pride crossed Harlow's face. "That sounds like Maverick. Even injured, he'd try to complete the mission." He turned to Mike. "What's his prognosis?" The frank discussion that followed confirmed what everyone had sensed. Maverick's condition remained critical. His chances of survival would increase dramatically with proper hospital care, but transport itself posed significant risks. I have a specially equipped K9 unit vehicle outside, Harlow offered. Medical transport gear, oxygen, the works. If you think he can make it to the veterinary hospital. Mike considered this, then nodded decisively. It's his best chance. I'll ride with you. Monitor him during transport. As the adults began making arrangements, Emma felt her world shifting beneath her feet. Everything was happening too fast. Maverick had gone from being her secret discovery, her responsibility, to being someone else's partner, someone else's concern. Tears welled in her eyes despite her attempts to be brave. Abigail noticed her daughter's distress and knelt beside her. "Emma, honey, this is good news. Maverick has a home to go back to, someone who loves him." "I know," Emma whispered, unable to explain the complicated emotions swirling inside her. "But I thought maybe—" Understanding dawned on Abigail's face. "You thought he might become our dog." Emma nodded miserably, a tear escaping to trail down her cheek. "Oh, sweetheart." Abigail pulled her daughter into a hug. "I know this is hard. You formed a special bond with Maverick, but he had a life before you found him a purpose, and a person who's been missing him desperately." "Will I ever see him again?" Emma asked, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. Before Abigail could answer, Detective Harlow approached. Having overheard the exchange, he crouched down to Emma's level, his expression serious. "Emma, if Maverick survives, and I believe he will, thanks to you, I'd like you to be part of his recovery. Would you like that?" Hope bloomed in Emma's chest as she nodded vigorously. "Good," Harlow said with a smile, "because I have a feeling he's going to need his hero to help him remember how to be brave again." 1 year later, the autumn leaves blazed in shades of gold and crimson across the fairgrounds of Maplewood's annual Harvest Festival. Rows of white tents housed everything from quilting displays to pie contests, while the central arena had been set up for various demonstrations throughout the weekend. A banner strung across the entrance proclaimed, "Special Presentation Working Dogs and Rescue Animals, 200 p.m." Emma Calloway stood nervously behind the announcer's platform, smoothing down her new blue dress for perhaps the 20th time. At 9 years old, she was still small for her age, but something in her bearing had changed over the past year, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "You ready for this? Half pint?" Uncle Jackson asked, adjusting the veteran's cap he wore for special occasions. Emma nodded, though butterflies danced in her stomach. "Do I look okay?" "Like $1,000,000, he assured her with a wink. "Your mom's got the good camera already in the front row." Emma peeked around the platform to spot her mother in the gathering crowd. Abigail waved enthusiastically, pointing to the seat she'd saved beside her. The past year had brought changes for her, too, a promotion to head nurse in the pediatric department, shorter working hours, and a newfound appreciation for her daughter's quiet strength. "There are so many people," Emma observed, feeling a flutter of stage fright. "They're not here for you," teased a familiar voice behind her. "They're here for the real star of the show." Emma turned to find Detective James Harlow approaching, looking vastly different from their first meeting. Gone was the haggard, emotional man who had arrived at Uncle Jackson's cabin that fateful morning. Today, in his crisp uniform with K9 unit insignia, he radiated calm authority. And beside him, moving with the fluid grace that had taken months of rehabilitation to restore, walked Maverick. Emma's heart soared at the sight of the German shepherd, His transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The once matted coat now gleamed in the autumn sunlight, thick and healthy. Where open wounds had been, only faint scars remained, most hidden beneath his fur. The broken leg had healed well, though Maverick still favored it slightly when tired. His face, once torn and ravaged, showed only a single prominent scar, a pale line running from the corner of his mouth up toward his eye that gave him a slightly lopsided but oddly dignified appearance. But the most profound change was in his eyes. The pain-clouded, desperate gaze that had first met Emma's in the forest clearing had been replaced by clear amber intelligence and serene confidence. "Maverick," Emma exclaimed, dropping to her knees as the German shepherd bounded forward to greet her, his tail wagging enthusiastically. Unlike most police dogs, who maintained a professional distance with strangers, Maverick had been granted special dispensation when it came to Emma. James had recognized early in the dog's recovery that the bond formed during those desperate hours in the forest was something extraordinary, a connection that had played a crucial role in Maverick's will to survive. "He's been whining all morning," James confided as Maverick covered Emma's face with doggy kisses. "Knew we were coming to see you today." "I missed you too, buddy." Emma laughed, scratching behind Maverick's ears in the spot she knew he loved. "Are you ready to show everyone how amazing you are?" As if understanding perfectly. Maverick sat at attention, his expression suddenly serious and professional. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker, calling the crowd to attention. Emma took a deep breath as she heard her name announced along with Detective Harlow's. This was it, the moment they'd been preparing for over the past 3 months. Together, the unlikely trio walked onto the presentation area. A ripple of applause greeted them, swelling as people recognized Maverick from the newspaper stories that had followed his dramatic rescue and recovery. Detective Harlow stepped to the microphone first, briefly recounting Maverick's history as a police K-9, his abduction, and his miraculous rescue by the bravest little girl I've ever met. The simple words brought a flush of pride to Emma's cheeks as the crowd applauded again. Then it was her turn. Emma had practiced her part of the presentation dozens of times, but standing before all those people, she momentarily froze. A gentle nudge against her hand drew her attention downward. Maverick had moved to stand beside her, pressing his warm body against her leg in silent support, drawing strength from his presence. Emma began to speak, her voice growing steadier with each word as she described finding Maverick in the forest and their arduous journey together. She carefully avoided the most graphic details of his injuries, focusing instead on his courage and intelligence. "Maverick taught me something important," she concluded, her clear voice carrying across the hushed audience. "Sometimes the ones who have been hurt the most have the most love to give. They just need someone to believe in them." As Emma stepped back, Detective Harlow took over again, explaining how Maverick's case had led to the breakup of a multi-state dog-fighting ring and the rescue of 17 other dogs. While Maverick's injuries had ended his career as an active police K-9, he had found a new purpose as an ambassador for animal rescue and education about animal cruelty. "And now," Harlow announced with a smile, "Maverick would like to show you some of his special skills." What followed was a carefully choreographed demonstration. Despite his retirement from active duty, Maverick had retained all his training. He responded perfectly to each command, sitting, staying, finding hidden objects, and even demonstrating a modified version of the protection work that had once been his specialty. The crowd gasped and applauded as the German Shepherd executed each task with precision and obvious enjoyment. But the highlight came during the final segment, when Emma participated directly in the demonstration. Following a prearranged scenario, Emma pretended to be lost in the woods, represented by several potted trees brought in for the occasion. Maverick, working off-leash, tracked her scent, found her hiding place, and then led Detective Harlow directly to her. The symbolism wasn't lost on those who knew their story. What had once been a desperate struggle for survival had been transformed into a joyful display of partnership and trust. As the demonstration concluded to enthusiastic applause, Emma found herself center stage with Maverick sitting proudly beside her. Detective Harlow handed her the microphone for final remarks. "A lot of people ask me if I was scared that day in the forest," Emma said, her hand resting lightly on Maverick's head. "And I was really scared. But being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what's right, even when you are afraid." She looked down at Maverick, her eyes shining. "Maverick taught me that. And I think he has a lot more to teach all of us." The applause that followed warmed Emma's heart. But nothing compared to the feeling of Maverick leaning trustingly against her leg, his amber eyes looking up at her with what could only be described as adoration. As they left the arena together, the retired police dog, his handler, and the little girl who had saved him, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. There had been dark times during Maverick's recovery when it seemed he might not survive. The extensive surgeries, the infections that followed, the slow and painful rehabilitation. Through it all, Emma had visited whenever possible, reading books aloud during his recoveries, celebrating each milestone. In return, Maverick had helped Emma find her voice. The shy, quiet mouse, who had once been bullied at school, had transformed, inspired by Maverick's courage to discover her own. Her classmates now looked at her with respect rather than derision. And when Emma had started a program at the local animal shelter where children read to dogs awaiting adoption, she'd found not only her passion but also friendships with others who shared it. Some bonds, Emma had learned, transcend ordinary explanation. They're forged in moments of extremity, tempered by shared struggle, and strengthened by mutual healing. The connection between a small girl and a broken dog, both somehow making the other whole, was exactly that kind of bond. "We saved each other, didn't we?" Emma whispered to Maverick as they walked together into the bright autumn afternoon. His head held high, her hand resting gently on his back. And Maverick, understanding as always, looked up at his young savior with eyes that needed no words to express their answer. In this world of constant noise and disconnection, Emma and Maverick's story reminds us of what truly matters. It speaks to a time when neighbors helped neighbors, when we didn't walk past suffering, when we taught our children that doing the right thing often means doing the hard thing. Remember when we raised kids who wouldn't give up, even when adults had lost hope? This little girl's determination to save a broken creature carrying a dog twice her size through miles of wilderness mirrors the strength of our own parents and grandparents who weathered wars and depressions without complaint. And Maverick, bearing scars both visible and hidden, shows us that second chances are possible at any age, that our past suffering doesn't define our future purpose. How many of us carry our own scars, visible or not, How many of us have needed someone to believe in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves? Perhaps that's why this story resonates so deeply. It reminds us that healing often comes through helping others heal, that in our broken places we find our greatest strength, and that sometimes the truest form of courage is simply refusing to give up on someone everyone else has abandoned.